Putin's main spokesperson lets desperation slip after suffering the largest drone attack since World War II. Look at this.
In fact, the drone attacks persist. Measures are being taken to mitigate the consequences. Despite everything, given the high success rates of the air defense systems, the President receives very detailed reports regularly several times a day, and if necessary, can be contacted at any time. Get more interesting images of Ukrainian cities. The footage is impressive, showing the results of the attacks. The attacks will certainly and undoubtedly continue. The Kiev regime holds its position. This is not a negotiation plan. The Kiev regime is currently in a very difficult position. The situation on the battlefronts will soon become catastrophic for Ukraine, and that's exactly what all of this is tied to, and that much is certain.
Moscow was once again hit by a heavy wave of Ukrainian drones, and the Kremlin's reaction showed much more tension than control. On the morning of June 19, 2026, while Russia tried to say that its defenses worked well, images and reports showed the Russian capital rocked by explosions, smoke, disruptions at airports, and new attacks against the refinery that supplies part of Moscow. Vladimir Putin's spokesperson tried to sell efficiency, but the very need to explain the attack already revealed the core unease. The war that the Kremlin promised to keep away from Russia's heartland has once again come close to the center of power. The Ukrainian offensive was described by international outlets as the largest against Moscow since the beginning of the Russian invasion. In news coverage, it was described as an unprecedented airstrike on the capital since World War II. That's when desperation appears without the need for a scream. Ukraine did not attack just any area. It targeted energy infrastructure, pierced through layers of defense, and hit the symbol that Putin tries hardest to preserve: the sense of invulnerability within Russia itself. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, Israel increased attacks against Hezbollah in Lebanon, Trump demanded the group's disarmament, and Iran threatened to retaliate against any violation by the United States. And they even tried to impose controls over the Strait of Hormuz. What did Peskov let slip? Why was Moscow targeted? How does this shock connect to the pressure on Iran, Hezbollah, and Russia? I'll tell you all about it in a moment. If you like this kind of straightforward, no-nonsense content, consider subscribing because we have videos like this every day. The main attack took place in Moscow and the metropolitan area, with Ukrainian drones hitting the Gazprom Neft refinery in the southeast of the Russian capital for the second time in the same week. The action took place after a previous attack on June 16, which had already damaged part of the structure. The refinery is important because it helps supply Moscow with fuel, diesel, and other derivatives. The Ukrainian government has called this type of operation a long-range sanction because the drones not only cause physical damage but also force Russia to spend more money, defense, disperse anti-aircraft systems, and explain to their own population why the capital no longer seems untouchable. Kyiv's message was simple: if Russia carries out constant attacks on Ukrainian cities, Moscow can also feel the weight of the war that Putin chose to prolong. In the reports that circulated, Peskov tried to claim that the Russian air defenses performed well during the offensive. But that statement clashes with the reality shown in the images of interruptions and damage. When the government needs to say that everything worked well after drones reach a strategic refinery in the capital, the statement stops sounding confident and starts to sound like damage control. Moscow has one of the densest defense networks in Russia, with layers of protection, radars, mobile systems, and barriers specifically prepared to prevent this kind of penetration. Even so, drones got through, hit, and caused visible impact. The mayor of Moscow and regional authorities spoke of a major offensive and drones being shot down, but the number of interceptions does not erase the most troubling fact. Some went where they shouldn't have. This is the point that weakens Putin's narrative. The Kremlin spent years selling the war as a distant, controlled operation managed by generals and shielded by Russian strength. Now, residents see smoke, airports face restrictions, the refinery is hit again, and state television has to manage the silence or change the subject to avoid showing the extent of the failure. Hitting Moscow has a different effect than hitting a distant base. The capital is the showcase of Russian power, the political, economic, and symbolic center of the regime. Each drone that breaks through the air defense chips away at the propaganda of security. Russia tries to show normality, but normality becomes difficult when the war enters through the sky of the city, which should be the most protected in the nation. It's not just a military issue, it's a matter of internal morale. While Russia tried to control the damage to its image, another explosive front was advancing in the Middle East. Israel intensified attacks against Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley after new ceasefire violations. The Israeli army stated that it hit more than 80 targets belonging to the group, including command centers, launch sites, and structures used for attacks. According to information released by the Israeli military, dozens of Hezbollah members were killed and 2 terrorists were eliminated after an attack against Israeli soldiers. The launcher used in the attack was also destroyed. The Israeli response came after a series of attacks attributed to Hezbollah between June 17th and 18th. The count, released by monitoring channels, indicated 25 separate attacks, 63 rockets, 1 missile, 7 actions with explosive drones, 2 attacks with improvised explosive devices, and 1 infiltration attempt involving 5 operatives. In total, 72 munitions and attack events were recorded in 48 hours. Even with the ceasefire and ongoing diplomatic negotiations, the group backed by Iran continued firing at Israel and Israeli forces. Israel responded because it understands that a ceasefire without disarmament becomes just a pause for Hezbollah to reorganize. The Israeli Air Force maintained operations in southern Lebanon, and Baalbek, about 85 kilometers inside Lebanese territory, also came under attack. The expanded offensive shows that Netanyahu does not intend to accept a vulnerable northern zone with Israeli communities at risk, while Hezbollah keeps rockets, drones, and command structures near the border. Benjamin Netanyahu was direct in stating that Israel will not tolerate attacks against its soldiers or its territory. His directive is to maintain decisive action against any threat and to remain in the security zone in southern Lebanon for as long as necessary to protect northern Israel. This stance angers Tehran and puts pressure on negotiations led by the United States, but it also leaves a difficult question for diplomats. How can they demand that Israel pull back while Hezbollah continues attacking? Trump stepped in at this point with a statement that shook things up. Hezbollah needs to disarm. The statement matches the American pressure on the group's financing networks and the attempt to prevent the deal with Iran from becoming a license for militias to keep operating. The White House wants to sell stability, cheaper oil, and an end to open fronts, but Israel is showing that stability without real security cannot be sustained. That's where Trump needs to balance 2 pressures, keeping Iran within the deal and preventing Hezbollah from using Lebanon as an armed shield. Iran responded by escalating its rhetoric. The Iranian Supreme National Security Council stated that if there is any violation or offense by the United States, response measures will be taken according to an already defined plan. At the same time, the Iranian regime demanded guarantees that hostilities in Lebanon will end according to the existing agreement before resuming talks with the United States in Switzerland. The meeting scheduled in Switzerland was postponed due to scheduling differences and unresolved issues. Sources cited in the Arab press stated that the Israeli operations in Lebanon are straining the understandings between Washington and Tehran. For the agreement to move forward, the United States would have to pressure Israel to stop the bombings and pull back. But this request runs up against the reality of Hezbollah's attacks. Israel does not want to be put in the position of having to stop while the armed group keeps firing. The Strait of Hormuz has become another pressure point. The Iranian authority responsible for the corridor announced that ships wishing to cross the area will need to submit a request at least 48 hours in advance, with contact information, travel details, route, and schedule coordinated with Iranian authorities. Tehran said that during the 60-day arrangement, it will not charge fees for security, protection, and environmental services, and that transit insurance costs will be covered by the Iranian government. The measure was presented as part of the Memorandum of Understanding with the United States, but has already been seen by critics as an attempt to control passage in the Hormuz without officially calling it a blockade. The problem is simple. If the agreement provided for free commercial passage requiring prior request, route coordination, and operational authorization puts Iran back at the center of the bottleneck. The regime opens the door with one hand and holds the doorknob with the other. For the energy market and for major shipping routes and companies, it's a sign of risk. The connection between Moscow, Lebanon, Iran, and Hormuz is part of the same power struggle. Russia tries to maintain the image of an invincible power while Ukrainian drones hit its capital. Iran tries to preserve its regional influence by using Hezbollah. The Middle East increases the significance of this moment because it shows allies and adversaries testing limits at the same time. Hezbollah tests Israel. Israel tests how far it can go without completely breaking off negotiations. Iran tests Trump in the Strait of Hormuz and in Lebanon. Trump tests Tehran by demanding disarmament and maintaining diplomatic pressure. Putin watches this unfold while his own capital feels the war overhead. So far, the image that remains is of a Russia trying to hide its vulnerability and Iran trying to negotiate with a clenched fist. And Israel saying that a ceasefire does not mean accepting rockets, drones, and infiltration on its own border. I'm Milson Alves, Global International Affairs Specialist, and my purpose is to keep you well informed with the truth every day. The news links are in the video description. Leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and at the end, check out the comments so you can be even more engaged with the Milson Alves community.